I'm Rebecca Wilson, 29, a marketing executive in Chicago. That Sunday brunch at my parents' Evanston mansion seemed like any other family gathering. Expensive china, mimosas, and my golden child sister Stephanie basking in our parents' approval. I never expected that morning would shatter our family's carefully maintained facade. As Dad clinked his crystal glass for an announcement, my phone buzzed with an email from an unknown sender. If only I'd read it before Dad revealed who would inherit the family mansion. I'm still reeling from what happened next. Before I share my story, where are you watching from? Hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt like the family underdog. Trust me, you'll want to see how I finally turned the tables. Growing up as Rebecca Wilson, I was always acutely aware of my place in the family hierarchy. Despite the spacious bedrooms and manicured lawns of our Evanston estate, there never seemed to be quite enough room for my achievements in my parents' world. My father, Michael Wilson, now 62, built Wilson Real Estate Development from nothing, transforming it into one of Chicago's premier luxury property developers. His imposing presence and perfectionist standards cast a long shadow over our childhood. My mother, Amanda Wilson, 60, was more than just a supportive spouse. A former interior designer with an impeccable eye, she transformed my father's buildings into showcases that attracted Chicago's elite. Together, they were an unstoppable force in the business world, their coordinated talents creating a small empire worth millions. Then there was my sister Stephanie, 32. From the moment she showed interest in real estate at age 10, she became the repository of my parents' hopes and dreams. 3 years older than me, she had always been the golden child, the one who followed the path laid out for her with unwavering precision. She majored in business, interned at father's company every summer, and after graduating from Northwestern, slid seamlessly into a VP position at Wilson Real Estate. Her aptitude for the business was undeniable, but so was the preferential treatment she received. Our family mansion in Evanston stood as a monument to my parents' success, a sprawling 6,500 square foot colonial revival worth $3.2 million, filled with antiques and overlooking Lake Michigan. I grew up witnessing my parents entertain business partners and city officials on its grand patio, orchestrating deals that would reshape Chicago's skyline. But I chose a different path. Rather than follow my sister into the family business, I pursued marketing, finding my talent in building brand stories instead of physical buildings. After graduating from the University of Chicago, I carved out my own career at Atlas Marketing Group, working my way up to executive level through merit rather than nepotism. My parents never quite understood why I'd abandoned the family legacy. My relationship with Stephanie remained strained but civil. We exchanged birthday gifts, attended family functions together, and maintained the appearance of sisterly closeness that our mother insisted upon. But beneath the surface pleasantries ran an undercurrent of competition that had been established in childhood. While Stephanie drove a Mercedes, a gift from our parents when she closed her first major property deal, I saved for 2 years to buy my modest Audi. When she purchased her Gold Coast condo, our parents contributed a hefty down payment as a business investment. Meanwhile, I rented a pleasant but ordinary apartment in Wicker Park, having received nothing more than a houseplant as a housewarming gift. These disparities weren't just financial. At family gatherings, my father would proudly introduce Stephanie as the future of Wilson Real Estate, while I was simply our younger daughter, Rebecca. My mother would subtly underscore the difference by reminding dinner guests that Rebecca's doing very well in her little marketing job, while beaming with pride over Stephanie's latest multi-million-dollar development project. Previous family brunches had become predictable performances. My parents would use the occasion to celebrate Stephanie's latest accomplishment, a successful property acquisition, a feature in Chicago business, a deal closed with a prominent client. My achievements, a successful campaign, a promotion, an industry award, were acknowledged with polite interest before conversation inevitably swung back to real estate. I'd grown accustomed to this dynamic, developing a protective shell of professional independence. I told myself that I didn't need their approval, that creating my own path was more satisfying than following their predetermined one. But deep down, The little girl who once brought home perfect report cards hoping for the same enthusiasm that greeted Stephanie's mediocre ones still lived inside me. She still hoped that someday my parents would see my value, not as a lesser version of my sister, but as my own person with different but equal talents. This was the complex web of relationships I navigated every Sunday brunch. This particular Sunday, however, would prove different from all those that had come before it. That Sunday morning was picture-perfect, sunshine streaming through the bay windows, illuminating my mother's immaculate dining room. The mahogany table stretched impressively down the center, dressed in her finest Irish linen tablecloth and set with the Waterford crystal that only emerged for special occasions. I should have recognized this as the first clue that today wasn't just another family brunch. Mother had outdone herself with the spread. A silver chafing dish held made-to-order omelets beside a tower of Belgian waffles. Smoked salmon, capers, and cream cheese adorned an antique platter, while a basket overflowed with freshly baked croissants and blueberry muffins. The scent of truffle oil from the potato hash mingled with the rich aroma of my father's imported coffee. This wasn't just Sunday brunch, this was a celebration. "Rebecca, darling, you look tired," my mother greeted me with air kisses. "Those marketing campaigns must be keeping you up late." She turned to my sister. "Stephanie, that blazer is divine. Is it the new Burberry?" "Good eye, Mom," Stephanie replied, adjusting her perfectly tailored sleeve. "Just picked it up last week after we closed the Lakefront Heights deal." "That's my girl," my father chimed in, raising his mimosa in Stephanie's direction. 32 units sold pre-construction. She's got the Wilson touch. I smiled tightly, filling my plate with salmon and avocado toast. Atlas just landed the Meridian Hotels account. They're the fastest-growing boutique chain in the Midwest. "How nice," my mother said, her attention already drifting back to Stephanie. "Now, Stephanie, tell us more about that penthouse buyer. Wasn't he some tech entrepreneur?" The next 20 minutes followed the usual pattern, Stephanie detailing her professional triumphs, while my parents hung on every word. I sipped my mimosa, checking my phone occasionally under the table, a habit my mother usually chided me for. Today, however, she seemed too preoccupied to notice. After we'd finished the main course and my mother was serving her famous crème brûlée, my father cleared his throat and tapped his crystal glass with his silver spoon. "Amanda and I have an announcement," he said, reaching for my mother's hand. "After much consideration, we've decided it's time to downsize. We're moving to Naples. We've purchased a lovely condo in that Gulf community we've been eyeing." "Florida?" I asked, genuinely surprised. My father had always sworn he'd never leave Chicago. "What about the business?" "That's the second part of our announcement," my father continued, looking at Stephanie with undisguised pride. "Stephanie will be taking over as CEO of Wilson Real Estate, effective next month. I'll remain as chairman, of course, but the day-to-day operations will be her domain." Stephanie feigned modest surprise, though the lack of it in her eyes told me she'd known about this for some time. "And since we'll be spending most of our time in Florida," my father continued, "we've made some decisions about the house." My mother reached across the table to take Stephanie's hand. "We've decided that Stephanie should have the house. As the new face of Wilson Real Estate, she'll need an impressive place to entertain clients. This house has always been good for business." I felt as though I'd been doused with ice water. The family home, where I'd grown up, where every Christmas and birthday had been celebrated, was being handed to my sister without a second thought. "Of course," my father added, glancing briefly in my direction, "we've set aside some family heirlooms for you, Rebecca. Your grandmother's jewelry collection and those art pieces you always admired in the library. They should look lovely in your apartment." I struggled to maintain my composure. "I see. And was there ever any consideration that I might have wanted the house? Or at least been consulted about this decision?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My mother looked genuinely surprised by my question, as if the thought had never occurred to her. "Well, darling," she said carefully, "you've always been so independent. Your career isn't in Chicago real estate. You don't need to impress clients or host industry events. And with your busy schedule, would you really want the responsibility of maintaining a property this size?" Plus, Stephanie added with a thin smile, Your apartment is so cozy and suits your bohemian lifestyle perfectly. My apartment was a modern two-bedroom in a renovated industrial building, hardly bohemian, but that was Stephanie's way of reminding everyone that my life was smaller than hers. A toast, my father declared, lifting his glass and effectively ending any further discussion. To Stephanie, the new CEO of Wilson Real Estate and the next generation to steward our family home. I raised my glass mechanically, taking a large sip to hide the trembling of my lips. As the conversation moved to details of my parents' Florida plans, I felt my phone vibrate in my lap. Grateful for the distraction, I glanced down to see an email notification from an address I didn't recognize, truekeeper@securemail.com. The subject line froze the blood in my veins. I know what your parents really think about you. Would you excuse me? I said, pushing back my chair. I need to use the restroom. Once safely locked in the powder room, I opened the email with shaking hands. Rebecca, it read, what they just did isn't fair, and it isn't the whole story. There's more you don't know about your inheritance. If you want the truth, reply to this email. Time is of the essence. I stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror, my face pale with shock. Who could have sent this? How did they know what had just happened? And what truth were they referring to? For the first time in years, I felt something crack in my carefully constructed defenses. Tears threatened, but I blinked them back, reapplied my lipstick, and returned to the dining room with a smile that felt like it might shatter my face. I managed to maintain my composure through the remainder of brunch, plastering on a smile that felt foreign to my face. My parents and Stephanie continued discussing the Florida condo and transition plans for the company as if they hadn't just casually informed me I was being written out of any meaningful inheritance. The family crystal sparkled in the sunlight streaming through the windows, and all I could think was how none of those gleaming treasures would ever grace my table. I actually need to head out, I finally announced, glancing at my watch. I have a presentation to finish for tomorrow's client meeting. On a Sunday? My mother frowned. You work too hard, Rebecca. You should take time to relax like Stephanie. She makes time for hot yoga 3 times a week, don't you, dear? Stephanie nodded sagely. Work-life balance is essential for creativity. Perhaps that's something your marketing team should consider. I bit back a retort about how her work-life balance was made possible by nepotism and a trust fund. Instead, I gathered my purse and car keys. The brunch was lovely, Mom. Congratulations on the Florida condo. I turned to Stephanie, summoning every ounce of acting skill I possessed. And congratulations on the house. I'm sure you'll fill it with many memories. My father walked me to the door, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. We did set aside a small trust for you, Rebecca. Nothing like Stephanie's, of course, but enough to help with a down payment someday. When you're ready to stop renting and put down roots. The condescension in his tone made my skin crawl. As if my life choices were simply a phase I would outgrow. Thank you, Dad. That's thoughtful. The words tasted like ashes. The drive back to my apartment in Wicker Park became a blur of painful memories. I remembered being 16, winning the state debate championship, only to come home to a house celebrating Stephanie's C+ in economics. I recalled my college graduation, where my parents hosted a modest dinner compared to the lavish party they threw when Stephanie completed her MBA. Each milestone in my life had been measured against my sisters and found wanting. Once safely inside my apartment, my cozy, bohemian home, as Stephanie had so dismissively called it, I kicked off my heels and pulled out my laptop. The mysterious email sat in my inbox like a live grenade. I examined the sender's address more carefully, truekeeper@securemail.com. The domain belonged to an encrypted email service, making it virtually impossible to trace. The message itself contained no identifying information, no signature, just those cryptic lines suggesting someone knew intimate details about today's family meeting. Could it be a colleague of my father's? A disgruntled employee? Or perhaps someone from my mother's social circle who'd overheard discussions about the inheritance. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. The email had arrived precisely when my parents were making their announcement. I weighed my options. Responding could be walking into a trap. Yet ignoring it meant potentially missing crucial information about my family's decisions. After an hour of deliberation, I drafted a reply. I don't know who you are or what you think you know. If you have something to tell me, be specific. Otherwise, leave me alone. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. To my surprise, a response arrived within minutes. Your father's company isn't as financially stable as they want everyone to believe. The Lakefront Heights project Stephanie's been bragging about? It's underwater. Check the permit delays and cost overruns. They're not giving her the house out of favoritism alone, they're sheltering assets. Ask yourself why they created a separate LLC for the mansion 3 months ago. My heart raced as I read the message. This wasn't vague innuendo. These were specific claims that could be verified. How would an outsider know about a recently created LLC unless they had inside information? I opened my laptop and began searching public records. Sure enough, Wilson Family Holdings LLC had been registered with the state just 12 weeks earlier. The Lakefront Heights development had indeed faced permit challenges. A small article in the Chicago Business Journal mentioned delays that had pushed the completion date back by 6 months. I scrolled through my contacts and found Thomas Green, a college friend who now worked in commercial real estate financing. I texted him asking about Wilson Real Estate's current projects, framing it as market research for a potential client. His response made my stomach drop. Word is they're overextended on that lakefront development. Heard they've been shopping for additional investors. Surprised, TBH. Your dad usually runs a tighter ship. I sat back, my mind racing. This wasn't just about my parents favoring Stephanie. There was something financial happening beneath the surface. I replied to the mysterious emailer. Who are you? How do you know these things about my family's business? The reply came swiftly. Someone who was hurt by your father just like you were. I have documents. Financial records. If you want to see them, meet me at the Starbucks on North Michigan Avenue tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. I slept fitfully that night, my dreams filled with crumbling mansions and my sister laughing from the balcony as I stood outside in the rain. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would meet this mysterious informant, but on my terms. I texted my assistant that I'd be working remotely in the afternoon and asked a trusted colleague to sit at a nearby table during the meeting, just as a precaution. Before I could talk myself out of it, I called Stephanie directly. Hey Becca, can I call you back? I'm heading into a meeting with the zoning board about Lakefront Heights. We're having some issues with the permits. Funny you should mention permit issues, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. I heard the project is facing serious delays. A beat of silence. Where did you hear that? Around. Chicago's real estate world is smaller than you think. Is Dad's company in trouble, Steph? Don't be ridiculous, she snapped, her voice suddenly defensive. We're expanding so quickly that some administrative delays are inevitable. Look, I really can't talk about this now. Some of us have actual businesses to run, not just advertising campaigns to design. And some of us didn't get handed a mansion yesterday, I countered, my patience finally breaking. Why did Dad transfer the house to an LLC before giving it to you? That seems like an unusual step for a straightforward inheritance. Her sharp intake of breath told me I'd hit a nerve. Who have you been talking to? She demanded. This is family business, Rebecca. Stay out of it if you know what's good for you. She hung up abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone in shock. In all our years of rivalry, Stephanie had never openly threatened me. Whatever was happening with my family's finances, it was serious enough to make her drop her carefully maintained facade. I spent the rest of the morning researching Wilson Real Estate's recent projects. Most information was privately held, but I managed to piece together a troubling pattern. Several developments had stalled. Contractors had filed liens against one property. A longtime executive had departed suddenly 6 months ago. At 1:30 p.m., I headed to Michigan Avenue, my mind swirling with questions and a growing sense that the family dynamics I'd resented my entire life were even more complicated than I'd imagined. The Starbucks on North Michigan Avenue buzzed with the usual afternoon crowd, tourists resting tired feet, business people hunched over laptops, students with textbooks spread across tables. I arrived 15 minutes early, securing a corner table with a view of the entrance. My colleague Megan positioned herself nearby, pretending to be engrossed in her phone. At precisely 2 p.m., my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Corner table. Blue tie. Don't approach. Watch your email. I scanned the room and spotted an older man in a navy suit with a blue tie, sitting alone with a coffee. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place him. As I watched, he never looked in my direction, but I saw him typing on his phone. Seconds later, my email pinged with a new message containing a Dropbox link. The subject line read, "What your father did to me and is doing to you." I clicked the link, which opened a folder containing dozens of financial documents, emails, and legal filings. The first file was labeled "Read Me First" and contained a letter. Rebecca, my name is Harold Fitzgerald. I was your father's business partner for 15 years before he forced me out in 2015. We founded Wilson and Fitzgerald Real Estate together, though you probably don't remember the Fitzgerald part. Your father systematically diluted my ownership, excluded me from key decisions, and eventually presented me with fabricated evidence of misconduct to force me to sell my shares at a fraction of their value. I've spent years building a case against him, only to discover that he's effectively judgment-proof. The mansion you grew up in? It's been protected in a series of trusts and LLCs for years. The recent transfer to your sister is the final step in making sure those assets can never be touched by creditors or former partners like me. I'm not contacting you for revenge, though I won't pretend I'm not bitter. I'm contacting you because you deserve to know the truth. Your parents aren't just playing favorites. They're deliberately structuring their estate to exclude you while making it appear to be about business needs. The documents I've shared prove everything. Your sister knows all about this scheme. In fact, she helped design it as part of her MBA capstone project. I've included her thesis on strategic asset protection in family businesses, which uses a thinly veiled case study of your family's holdings as its central example. What you do with this information is up to you. But know this. Your parents sold the mansion to your sister for $1 to avoid gift taxes, while telling you that you only merit a few heirlooms because you chose a different path. Harold. I felt physically ill as I clicked through the documents. There were emails between my father and their family attorney discussing how to minimize Rebecca's expectations without triggering a contestable exclusion. Another file contained the actual transfer deed for the house, confirming Harold's claim about the $1 sale price. Most devastating was a scanned copy of Stephanie's MBA thesis. I downloaded it and searched for my name. There it was on page 47. In family businesses where one heir is designated as successor, heir A, and another pursues an unrelated career, heir B. Strategic asset allocation should favor heir A while providing heir B with sufficient token inheritance to discourage legal challenges. I was heir B, a problem to be managed, a potential legal threat to be neutralized with token inheritance. My hands shaking, I gathered my things and nodded to Megan that I was leaving. Outside, I called the one person who might have insight without a vested interest in the family drama, Julian Porter, my parents' longtime accountant who had always shown me kindness. "Rebecca, what a lovely surprise," Julian answered. "If you're calling about the trust your father mentioned, I'm still finalizing the paperwork." "Actually, Julian, I'm calling about something else. I recently learned that my parents transferred the family home to an LLC before giving it to Stephanie. I was wondering if you could explain why they would structure it that way." A lengthy pause followed. "Rebecca, I'm not really comfortable discussing your parents' financial decisions without their permission." "I understand," I said carefully. "I'm just trying to make sense of things. It seems like an unusual approach for a family inheritance." Julian sighed heavily. "Look, I probably shouldn't say anything, but I've always thought you were treated unfairly. The LLC structure is a standard asset protection strategy. It separates the property from personal holdings in case of lawsuits or business reversals." "Business reversals like the problems with Lakefront Heights?" I asked. Another pause. "You know about that?" "Yes, that development has exposed the company to significant liability. The LLC ensures that regardless of what happens with Wilson Real Estate, the family home remains protected. And by transferring it to Stephanie now, they start the clock on the look-back period for any future claims." "Claims from people like Harold Fitzgerald?" I ventured. Julian's sharp intake of breath confirmed my suspicion. How do you know that name? Never mind, I don't want to know. Rebecca, be careful. There's a reason your father cut ties with Harold. The man is bitter and vindictive. Is he wrong, though? About how my parents structured their estate to deliberately minimize my inheritance. Julian's silence spoke volumes. Finally, he said quietly, I advised against their approach. Family wealth should be shared equitably, regardless of who enters the family business. But your father was adamant, and your mother always defers to him on financial matters. And Stephanie? Was she involved in these decisions? I've already said too much, Julian replied. But yes, she's been attending the estate planning meetings for the past year. Rebecca, whatever you're planning, please be careful. Your father doesn't respond well to challenges. After thanking Julian, I sat in my car, trying to process everything I'd learned. The family dynamic I'd resented my entire life wasn't just emotional favoritism, it was a calculated financial strategy designed to benefit Stephanie at my expense, with her full knowledge and participation. I pulled out my phone and called Stephanie again. I can't talk right now, she answered irritably. I'm dealing with the mess you created. Dad's furious that you've been asking questions about family finances. Did you really write your MBA thesis about how to disinherit me without triggering a lawsuit? I asked bluntly. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Who have you been talking to? She finally demanded, her voice tight with panic. I've seen the documents, Stephanie. All of them. The LLC transfers, the emails about managing my expectations, your thesis. How could you do this? I'm your sister. It's not personal, Rebecca, she said, her voice suddenly weary. It's business. The family business that you walked away from. I didn't walk away, I was pushed out. Every time I showed interest in real estate, Dad discouraged me. Remember when I asked to intern at his office in high school? He said I wasn't ready but had you filing paperwork that same summer. That's not how I remember it, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Did you know that Dad forced out his business partner? That the company name used to be Wilson and Fitzgerald. Her sharp intake of breath confirmed she hadn't known that particular detail. Harold Fitzgerald contacted you, didn't he? Rebecca, that man is dangerous. He's been obsessed with taking down Dad for years. Is the information he provided accurate? I pressed. A long pause followed. Not entirely. But there's enough truth in it to be damaging if it got out. Her voice lowered. Look, come to my office tomorrow. Alone. We need to talk about this face to face. I agreed, though I had no intention of facing my sister and potentially my father without preparation. After hanging up, I forwarded the documents to my own attorney with a request for an urgent review. Then I composed a careful email to Harold Fitzgerald, thanking him for the information and asking if he would be willing to provide a formal statement about his history with my father. His reply came within the hour. I've been waiting 7 years for someone to finally ask. I spent the evening preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most difficult family confrontation of my life. My attorney, Lisa Chin, called after reviewing the documents, her voice grave. Rebecca, these records show a clear pattern of intentional disinheritance, she said. The good news is that Illinois has strong case law regarding equitable treatment of heirs, especially when there's evidence of systematic exclusion. What's the bad news? I asked. Your father is clever. He's created a series of seemingly legitimate business reasons for every decision. Challenging this would mean a lengthy, expensive legal battle that would permanently damage your family relationships. I laughed bitterly. Those relationships are already damaged. They just hit it better than I did. After consulting with Lisa, I decided against meeting Stephanie at her office, where she would have home field advantage. Instead, I texted both my parents and Stephanie, requesting an emergency family meeting at the mansion the following evening. To my surprise, they agreed readily, though my father added ominously, "We have some concerns to discuss with you as well." I arrived at the family home at precisely 7 p.m., dressed in my most professional attire, a power suit I reserved for major client presentations. I'd brought copies of key documents in a leather portfolio and had Lisa on standby for a video call if needed. My mother opened the door, her face tight with worry. "Rebecca, darling, we were so concerned after your call. You sounded so upset." The living room presented a united front. My father in his leather armchair, Stephanie on the sofa beside my mother, all of them facing the single chair clearly intended for me. Classic interrogation positioning. I declined the offered seat. "I prefer to stand, actually. This won't take long." My father frowned. "Rebecca, Stephanie tells me you've been making some concerning allegations based on information from Harold Fitzgerald, of all people. That man is a dishonest opportunist who nearly destroyed our company." "Interesting perspective," I replied coolly. "His documentation tells a different story." I removed the first set of papers from my portfolio. "Like this partnership agreement showing he owned 45% of the company you now claim has always been solely yours." My father's face reddened. "Business partnerships evolve. Harold was bought out fairly." "After you fabricated evidence of misconduct," I countered, producing another document. This retraction letter from the employee who initially accused him, dated after Harold was forced out, is quite illuminating. "Where did you get these documents?" my father demanded, half rising from his chair. "The better question is, why did you hide them from me my entire life? Why pretend our family wealth was all your creation when you had a partner for the first 15 years? My mother intervened, her voice placating. "Rebecca, darling, business matters are complicated. Your father protected us from Harold's recklessness. Like you've been protecting me by systematically excluding me from my inheritance?" I turned to Stephanie. "Show them your MBA thesis, Steph. Page 47 is particularly enlightening." Stephanie paled. "That was theoretical. A case study. Based on our family," I finished for her. "Where you refer to me as heir B, the problem child who needs to be managed with token inheritance to prevent legal challenges." My father stood abruptly. "Enough. Whatever Harold has told you is twisted to serve his vendetta. Yes, we've structured our estate to benefit Stephanie more substantially, but that's because she committed to the family business while you chose to pursue marketing." "I chose marketing after years of being told I wasn't suited for real estate," I replied evenly. "After every attempt I made to join the company was rebuffed while Stephanie was welcomed with open arms." "That's not true," my mother protested weakly. "Isn't it? When I was 16, I asked to shadow Dad at work, and he said I should focus on my strengths and communications instead. When I was in college, I applied for an internship at Wilson Real Estate and was told all positions were filled, only to discover later that the son of Dad's golf buddy was hired the following week." My father waved dismissively. "You're misremembering." "Am I?" I pulled out another document, an email I'd discovered in the files Harold had shared. "This email from you to Mom, dated 2010, Rebecca asked about summer internships again. Redirected her toward marketing. One successor is complicated enough without dividing the business. I was 20 years old when you wrote this, Dad. You had already decided Stephanie would inherit everything and were actively preventing me from joining the business." A heavy silence fell over the room. My father stared at the email, his expression unreadable. My mother looked genuinely shocked. "Michael," she said quietly, "you told me Rebecca wasn't interested in real estate. That she preferred marketing. It was for the best," he muttered. "The business couldn't support two successors. So instead you decided to give everything to Stephanie?" I asked. "The company, the mansion, even manipulating my career choices to justify excluding me?" "You've done well in marketing," my father said defensively. "You have a good job, a nice apartment." "That I earned entirely on my own," I finished. "Without the advantages you showered on Stephanie. Do you have any idea how it felt growing up watching her receive opportunities one was never even offered? Having my achievements treated as afterthoughts while hers were celebrated with champagne." To my surprise, tears welled in my eyes despite my determination to remain composed. "I never expected equal treatment. You made it clear early on that Stephanie was the favorite. But I never imagined you were systematically structuring your finances to disinherit me while pretending it was about business." My mother rose, reaching toward me. "Rebecca, darling, it wasn't like that." "Then explain this." I produced the transfer deed for the mansion. "You sold a $3. 2 million home to Stephanie for $1 to avoid gift taxes, while telling me I should be grateful for grandmother's jewelry. How is that not systematic disinheritance? My father's expression hardened. Our estate planning is private family business. If Harold shared confidential documents with you, that's corporate espionage. Actually, I replied, in Illinois, it's legal for an heir to seek documentation regarding estate planning when there's reasonable suspicion of undue influence or fraud. My attorney confirmed this yesterday. You've involved an attorney? My father's voice rose dangerously. After everything we've done for you? What exactly have you done for me, Dad? Besides undermining my career aspirations and deliberately excluding me from my inheritance. My father stood, his face flushed with anger. I won't be spoken to this way in my own home. If you're threatening legal action. The home you sold to Stephanie for $1, I corrected him. And I'm not threatening anything. I'm asking for an explanation. Why wasn't I worth equal treatment? What did I ever do except be born second? An uncomfortable silence fell. My father glared at me, but I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. Perhaps, my mother ventured cautiously, we should discuss a more equitable arrangement. Amanda, my father snapped. No, Michael. Rebecca deserves an answer. My mother looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. Your father and I, we made assumptions. Stephanie showed interest in the business from such a young age, and you were always so independent, so capable on your own. We told ourselves you didn't need the same level of support. That's not a justification for systematic exclusion, I said quietly. That's just a convenient narrative you created to justify favoritism. To my astonishment, Stephanie suddenly burst into tears. I knew it was wrong, she sobbed. I knew it wasn't fair how they treated you. But I was afraid if I spoke up, I'd lose everything too. My father looked at her in disbelief. Stephanie, pull yourself together. No, Dad, she said, wiping her eyes. Rebecca's right. What we did, what I participated in, was wrong. My thesis wasn't just theoretical. I used our family as the model because it was the perfect example of unethical estate planning designed to benefit one heir at another's expense. My professor actually warned me that the strategy one outlined could be legally challenged. The admission hung in the air between us. My father sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. What do you want, Rebecca? He asked finally. Money? The house? I want what I've always wanted, I replied steadily. Fairness. Acknowledgement. For you to see me as equal to Stephanie, not as an inconvenient heir to be managed with token inheritance. I placed the portfolio on the coffee table. I have copies of everything. I'm prepared to pursue this legally if necessary, but I'd rather not. Despite everything, you're still my family. The word hung in the air, family, suddenly stripped of the glossy facade we'd maintained for years, revealing the broken reality beneath. We need time to process this, my mother said finally. To consult with our advisors. I nodded. I'll expect to hear from you within the week. And Dad? You might want to reach out to Harold Fitzgerald. He has his own claims to pursue, with or without my involvement. As I turned to leave, Stephanie rose and caught my arm. Rebecca, I'm sorry. Truly. I knew it was wrong, but I convinced myself I deserved it all because I joined the business. The truth is, I was afraid of failing without their support. For the first time in years, I saw vulnerability in my sister's eyes, the insecurity she'd hidden beneath her polished exterior. In that moment, I realized that while I'd been hurt by our parents' favoritism, she had been trapped by it, her entire identity built on their approval. We have a lot to work through, I told her. But at least now we're dealing with the truth. As I drove away from the family mansion, I felt lighter than I had in years. The confrontation hadn't solved everything, but it had finally brought our family's dysfunction into the open where it could no longer fester in silence. The week following the confrontation was eerily quiet. No calls from my parents, no texts from Stephanie. I threw myself into work, presenting the Meridian Hotel's campaign to enthusiastic clients who awarded Atlas marketing the contract. Under normal circumstances, I would have called my parents to share the news. Instead, I celebrated with my team, acutely aware of how I'd trained myself not to expect familial enthusiasm for my professional accomplishments. On Friday afternoon, Lisa Chin called with an update. "I've received communication from your parents' attorney," she said. "They're requesting a meeting next Tuesday to discuss a resolution. Based on the tone, I think they're open to negotiation rather than litigation." That's unexpected, I admitted. I was preparing for a fight. Sometimes when confronted with clear evidence and the possibility of public exposure, people choose to resolve matters privately, Lisa replied. Especially wealthy families with reputations to protect. Tuesday arrived with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The meeting was scheduled at a neutral location, a conference room at Lisa's law firm. I arrived early, reviewing our strategy one final time. To my surprise, my parents arrived without their usual attorney, accompanied instead by Julian Porter. Stephanie came separately, and I noticed immediately that something had changed. The confident facade she typically presented was subdued, her designer outfit replaced by a simple blazer and slacks. After tense greetings, we settled around the conference table. Julian opened a leather portfolio remarkably similar to the one I'd brought to our confrontation. "Before we begin," my father said, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone, "I want to acknowledge that mistakes were made. Serious mistakes in how we structured our estate and, more importantly, in how we treated you, Rebecca." I maintained a neutral expression, though internally I was shocked by this admission. Julian cleared his throat. "I've prepared a comprehensive overview of the Wilson family assets and a proposed restructuring that, if agreeable to all parties, would establish more equitable distribution." He distributed documents outlining a new estate plan that divided assets much more evenly between Stephanie and me. While Stephanie would retain leadership of Wilson Real Estate, the ownership would be split 60/40, with Stephanie holding the controlling interest, but me receiving substantial equity. The family mansion would remain with Stephanie due to its strategic location near the business headquarters, but in exchange, I would receive ownership of a commercial building in downtown Chicago currently leased to high-end tenants. The Lakeshore building generates approximately $425,000 in annual rental income, Julian explained. Its market value is comparable to the family home, though admittedly without the sentimental attachments. I reviewed the figures carefully. "And the trust fund that was mentioned?" "Both you and Stephanie would receive equal trust distributions," Julian confirmed. "Additionally, we've restructured the ownership of Wilson Real Estate to create a board position for you, should you wish to participate in company governance without day-to-day involvement." I glanced at my father, who looked uncomfortable but nodded. "We should have offered this years ago," he said quietly. "Your marketing expertise would be valuable to the company." Lisa and I requested a few minutes to confer privately. Once alone, she raised her eyebrows. "This is substantially more generous than I anticipated," she admitted. "The commercial property is an excellent asset, prime location, stable tenants, strong appreciation potential. And the board position gives you oversight without requiring you to leave your career." "It feels almost too easy," I said cautiously. "After decades of systematic favoritism, they're suddenly willing to restructure everything? What changed?" When we returned to the conference room, I posed this question directly. "While I appreciate this proposal, I'm curious what prompted this complete reversal." My mother and father exchanged glances. Stephanie looked down at her hands. "Several factors," my father finally said. "Harold Fitzgerald contacted me after your meeting. He's been persistent over the years, but seeing the documents he shared with you made me realize how my actions must appear from the outside. From your perspective. And I spoke with my ethics professor," Stephanie added quietly. "The one who reviewed my MBA thesis. She confirmed that our family's estate planning crossed ethical lines and could potentially violate Illinois inheritance laws." "Also," my mother interjected, "I've had several long conversations with your father about our family dynamics." She looked at me directly, her eyes glistening. "I failed you as a mother, Rebecca. I allowed your father's business priorities to overshadow what should have been equal love and support for both my daughters. When I saw those emails, especially the ones about deliberately redirecting your career interests, I realized how deeply we'd hurt you." I hadn't expected this emotional admission from my mother, who had always maintained a polished, controlled demeanor. The crack in her voice suggested genuine remorse. My father cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. Lakefront Heights is indeed facing challenges, but the company itself is stable. We're not hiding assets to avoid creditors. That part of Harold's narrative was exaggerated. However, his claims about the partnership dissolution were substantially accurate. I did maneuver him out unfairly, and that's something I've never properly addressed. I've arranged a separate meeting with Harold next week, he continued. We're discussing a settlement that would acknowledge his contributions to the company's early success. I absorbed this information carefully. And what happens if I accept this proposal? We just go back to Sunday brunches pretending the past never happened. Stephanie surprised me by reaching across the table. I don't want to pretend anymore, she said earnestly. I've been thinking a lot about why I participated in something I knew was wrong. I think I've been terrified of losing Dad's approval. My entire identity has been built around being the good daughter who followed his path. My father looked stricken at this characterization. Stephanie, that's not. It is, Dad, she interrupted gently. You've always made your love conditional on obedience to your vision. Rebecca was braver than me. She chose her own path despite knowing it would cost her your approval. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The family dynamic that had shaped our entire lives was being articulated with brutal honesty for the first time. After careful consideration and private consultation with Lisa, I decided to accept the proposal with a few modifications. I requested that the restructuring be legally binding and include specific provisions to prevent future manipulation. I also asked for formal acknowledgement of my right to be involved in any future family business decisions, regardless of my career path. I want to be clear, I said as we finalized the agreement. I'm not accepting this because I want the assets, though fairness matters. I'm accepting because it represents acknowledgement of the systematic favoritism that shaped our family and a commitment to change that dynamic moving forward. As we prepared to leave, Stephanie asked if we could speak privately. In the hallway outside the conference room, she looked more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. I know it doesn't fix anything, she said hesitantly, but I wanted you to know that I've started therapy. To understand why I was willing to participate in something that hurt my own sister. I don't expect forgiveness, but I am truly sorry, Rebecca. For the first time in years, I saw my sister instead of my rival, a woman who had been shaped by the same dysfunctional family system, albeit from a different position within it. Healing will take time, I told her honestly. But this is a start. As I walked to my car, I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying my entire adult life. The inheritance itself mattered, but more important was the acknowledgement of worth it represented, the recognition that I deserved equal consideration simply because I was their daughter, regardless of my career choices. The journey wasn't over, but a significant corner had been turned. For the first time, our family was dealing with reality instead of maintaining appearances. And in that painful honesty lay the possibility of genuine healing. 6 months passed more quickly than I could have imagined. The commercial building on Michigan Avenue was now legally mine, complete with a well-established property management team that made ownership surprisingly hands-off. The monthly income allowed me to purchase my bohemian apartment outright and establish my own investment portfolio, bringing a financial independence I'd never quite achieved on my marketing salary alone. Today marked our first family gathering since the legal settlement, a casual dinner at a neutral location, a restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan that none of us had particularly strong associations with. As I drove there, I reflected on the seismic shifts that had occurred in our family dynamics since that fateful Sunday brunch. My career at Atlas Marketing had flourished. The Meridian Hotel's campaign had won industry recognition, leading to my promotion to creative director. I'd begun accepting speaking engagements about brand storytelling, establishing my own professional identity entirely separate from the Wilson name. There was a confidence in my work now, a certainty that my accomplishments stood on their own merits rather than being measured against my sister's different path. When I arrived at the restaurant, Stephanie was already there, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. Gone was the power suit and perfectly coiffed hair, replaced by casual elegance and a more natural style. Rebecca, she greeted me with a tentative smile. You look great. Thanks, I replied, settling into my chair. How's the therapy going? Revelatory, she admitted. Turns out being the golden child comes with its own set of damages. I've been unpacking a lifetime of conditional approval and impossible standards. That sounds familiar, just from the other side of the equation. We shared a knowing look, sisters recognizing the different but complementary ways our parents had shaped us. My parents arrived moments later. My father, once domineering in every family interaction, seemed somehow smaller, more human. My mother looked more vibrant, having taken up painting again after decades of focusing solely on my father's business needs. Rebecca, my father said, his typical authoritative tone noticeably softened. That building of yours is outperforming market projections. Julian showed me the quarterly reports. I know, I replied with a smile. I've been working with the management company on some improvements to the common areas. We think we can increase tenant retention. Smart approach, he nodded, a flicker of genuine respect in his eyes that I'd rarely seen directed toward me. Dinner proceeded with a strange new dynamic, conversations that included all four of us equally, questions about my career that showed actual interest rather than polite obligation, and, most surprisingly, moments of genuine laughter. The tension that had defined our family gatherings for decades was not entirely gone, but substantially diminished. After dessert, my mother reached across the table and took my hand. I've been seeing a therapist too, she confessed. I'm trying to understand how I allowed such an equality between my daughters to become normalized. I keep remembering all the moments when I should have intervened, but chose harmony with your father instead. We're all learning, I said gently. That's all any of us can do. Later, as we prepared to leave, Stephanie pulled me aside. I've been meaning to tell you, I reconnected with Madison and Taylor from high school. Remember them? I nodded, surprised. Madison and Taylor had been my close friends during our teenage years, girls who had witnessed the differential treatment in our household, but had never been invited to Stephanie's social circle. They had some interesting perspectives about our family dynamic, Stephanie continued. Things that were obvious to outsiders, but that I never saw or chose not to see. Madison mentioned how at your debate championship, Mom and Dad left early to attend my soccer game where I mostly sat on the bench. I remember, I said quietly. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I really am. Her eyes were sincere. I'm trying to be a better sister. The boundaries between us remained, necessarily so. Trust, once broken, requires time and consistent evidence of change to rebuild. But the tentative bridge we were constructing felt more authentic than the polite facade we'd maintained for years. At home that evening, I settled onto my balcony with a glass of wine, gazing out at the Chicago skyline. My phone buzzed with a message from Julian Porter. Harold Fitzgerald and your father signed final settlement papers today. 30 years of business history finally resolved. Thought you'd want to know. I smiled, thinking about how one mysterious email had triggered a cascade of truth that changed everything. The inheritance itself, the building, the trust fund, the board position, were valuable, certainly. But the real wealth had come in reclaiming my sense of worth, in establishing boundaries that protected my dignity, and in demanding the recognition I'd been denied for decades. The journey of healing wasn't complete. My parents still occasionally slipped into old patterns of favoritism. Stephanie and I were building a new relationship carefully, aware of the habits and hurts that could easily resurface. I still attended therapy regularly, unpacking the ways that being the less favored child had shaped my self-perception and relationships. But for the first time, our family was dealing with reality instead of maintaining appearances. The painful honesty had created space for genuine connection, however tentative and imperfect. As I watched the city lights shimmer across Lake Michigan, I thought about all the viewers who might have experienced similar family dynamics. The subtle or not-so-subtle favoritism, the unequal treatment justified as just how things are, the lifelong impact of being deemed somehow less worthy. If my story offers any wisdom, it's this. Your worth is not determined by where you fall in your family's hierarchy. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And sometimes, bringing painful truths into the light is the only way to begin healing the wounds that have shaped your life. Have you experienced favoritism in your family? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to show your support. And if you know someone struggling with family dynamics like these, sharing might help them feel less alone. Thank you for joining me on this journey from hurt to healing. Remember, recognizing your worth is the first step toward claiming it.